Hi, I'm Johnny from UltimatePaperMache.com, and this week I made this little puffer fish. I just think he's really cute. I had some leftover paper mache clay from the last video that I made showing you how some foil tape would really help us out if we were going to put a paper mache sculpture in the oven, and if the armature was made with hot glue in it. Because obviously you don't want any hot glue in the bottom of your oven. But because I had the tape and I had some leftover paper mache clay, so I used both of them to make this fish. I also used that foil tape for his fins. I'll show you in this photograph how thin they are. I thought that was really cool. I had a lot of fun playing around with the tape, but don't go out and buy the foil tape. You know, it costs like $8. You do not need to go buy some. If you're not in a hurry and you're not going to put your sculpture in the oven to make it dry fast, you do not need the foil tape. You can make the fins some other way. I also want to mention that just because I use paper mache clay doesn't mean you need to. You can go ahead and use paper strips and paste and make a really cute puffer fish if you want to. I also, oh gosh, there's a lot of things I want to add here. I use a Guineafowl Pufferfish photo that does not have really strong spikes like a lot of them do. If you want to make one with spikes, I have a post on my website of how I made that kind of spikes on an echidna. And you can go ahead and look at that post. I'll put a link to it right down below so that you can see how that was done if you want your puffer fish to be the spiky kind. Now, I didn't want this video to be too long, but I also wanted to show you the entire process from beginning to end. So if there's any part that you're not quite sure, how did I do that? Because maybe I left something out when I was trying to hurry, just go ahead and put a comment down below. I do try to answer every comment I get. Sometimes I'm a little slow, but I do try really hard. So go ahead and write it down there. You might as well hit the like button while you're down there too. Anyway, let me show you how I made this guy. I used some plaster of Paris and a dowel in order to make the little base. I put it in the bottom of a plastic container that I happen to have, an old yogurt container. I made the plaster with half a cup of water and 1 cup of plaster. If you're using a plastic container, you don't need a release. It will just pop out eventually when it gets hard. So go ahead and pour it in there, then prop up your dowel right in the middle and make sure it's standing up straight. It's going to take a couple of hours for it to harden enough so that you can take it back out again. When the plaster first gets hard, the dowel is going to be in there really, really tight. But after 2 or 3 days, when it's had a chance to dry, the hole that the dowel is in is going to get bigger and the dowel will come loose. That's not a big deal. When you're all done, go ahead and put some glue in there and make sure that it stays where it belongs. Once your base is actually solid and you can work with it without doing any damage to it, make sure that the plaster is hard enough so that you're not going to mess it up. Then go ahead and put the pattern that you're going to be using on cardboard and cut it out. You can use my pattern if you want to. I'm going to put a link to it directly down below this video. Or if you want a different kind of fish, you can go ahead and make your own pattern. I'm going to put a link to a video that I made showing you exactly how to do that. So both of those are going to be down below. Now I went ahead and cut off the fins and the tail because I'm going to be making those separately with some of that foil tape and with some thin aluminum wire. But if you would like to use the cardboard itself for the fins, then go ahead and cut around them and leave them right on the pattern. Once I had the pattern completely cut out, I used some masking tape to hold it on. I made the fins next, and like I said, I used some really thin aluminum wire. I sandwiched the wire between 2 pieces of the foil tape. You do need to squish the foil down really, really good because it'll get just a little bit wrinkled when you're putting them together. So you can go ahead and use some kind of tool or just your finger or your fingernail and flatten it out really nice. You'll want the pattern to be stuck onto that dowel really good, and the masking tape can come loose while you're working on the rest of the shapes with the aluminum foil. So I crumpled up some fairly small pieces of aluminum foil and made sure that the hot glue that attached those pieces was on both the dowel and the cardboard pattern. And that way you can work on the rest of the shapes that you're building without having to worry about that cardboard pattern coming loose from the dowel. I did that on both sides of the dowel, and then I just started filling in the actual shapes of the fish. I'm not going to show you the whole entire process of actually building out the shapes, because what we have basically is kind of like a soccer ball with fins. So this is a pretty easy sculpting project. Just keep looking at it from all sides to make sure that you're getting them around, and you're going to have a pufferfish. Because the pattern is taped to one side of a fairly thick dowel, the pattern itself is not exactly in the middle. So I used a felt tip pen to draw a line where I figured should be the middle. And then I used some white, just half balls of styrofoam to place the eyeballs. But of course you can't actually put styrofoam in the oven because it's going to melt. So then I made some little balls with more aluminum foil, and then I rolled them around on the table to make them as smooth as possible before I attached them to the fish. Because I was going to put them in the oven and there was glue on the inside, I used my foil tape. Like I said, if you're patient and you are not in a hurry, just leave it out on the counter and it will dry naturally. It dries faster if you put it in front of a fan, but you don't need to put it in the oven if you don't want to. And if you're not going to put it in the oven, you don't need the foil tape. Once that was all done, I covered the fish with a really thin layer of paper mache clay. I didn't put quite as much flour as you can. The recipe shows you how much flour you can add. As a matter of fact, you can keep adding as much as you want to. It really doesn't make any difference. But I like to use less flour because it allows me to make a really thin layer, especially when I know that I'm going to be putting a second layer on it like I am for this fish. So I put it on practically paper thin. I ran out of room to hold on to him really quick like you always do, so I stuck it in the oven at 250 degrees. I left it in there for 15 minutes and then I was able to cover the rest of it. I did not cover the fins with the paper mache clay. And then I mixed up some of the air dry clay. I made the air dry clay just a little bit wetter than you would normally do if you were going to be using it to sculpt shapes. I'm not using it for that. I'm actually using it to make little tiny holes all over my fish. This idea came from our friend Rex Wynn, who was playing around with trying to make skin that looked like a pufferfish skin. If you poke the knitting needle into the air dry clay before it forms a skin on the outside, because it will dry really fast, but if you do that before it forms a skin, the needle will actually pull out little hairs of paper and they're kind of sharp. So you end up with, well, it feels like a real pufferfish probably does. At least this guineafowl pufferfish, which doesn't have the spikes, really big spikes. And that was really cool. Then when I was adding the air dry clay on the top of my fish, the phone rang, I went and answered it, I got distracted. Okay, so there did get a skin on it. It dried on the top, just a teensy bit before I had a chance to poke the holes in it, and I didn't get any hairs on the top part, which was kind of disappointing. After I had all of the skin completely covered, I went back just one more time and put his teeth on there. That's actually is called a beak. The upper one I just painted white when I got done. I didn't bother actually sculpting the upper part of his beak because the photograph that I was using didn't show the upper part of his beak very well. And then of course it had to go back in the oven about 30 minutes just to make sure that everything was completely dry all the way through. Never want to paint anything with any kind of paper mache on it if there's any water left in it at all. Now as soon as the air dry clay was completely dry, I did take it down to the basement and I sprayed it with a primer. The acrylic paint that I'm going to be using for the fish is not going to stick to just pure foil, and the fins are still foil. The primer dries really fast, so I was able to get back to painting it really quickly. And I used just burnt umber that was mixed with a little bit of water and a little bit of golden glazing liquid. I wanted it to be thin enough so that you could see the white through it, but I didn't want it to be runny, so that's what I added that golden glazing liquid for. And then when I put it on there, I used a wide flat brush, and I kind of used the brush like at an angle, so that with a very, very small amount of paint on the brush, because I didn't want it filling up all those little holes. Now, if you don't make holes, you just paint the white spots on later, then you obviously don't have to be quite as careful as I did. When I painted the larger white spots, I used some folk art vintage white mixed with regular titanium white. In order to make those really round spots, I used a very small stencil brush and just kind of twirled it on there, as you can see me doing there, and made really nice spots. Right around his mouth he has really small spots, and around the eyes. The fins have fairly small spots too, so you'll need to just use a small brush. I put the burnt umber, as you can see, is over his eyes as well. So I filled in the pupil with black, and then I later went back around it with a really, really fine brush and I made a very fine black line around his eyes, and then I put just a one reflection spot, maybe two reflection spots to make him kind of come alive. I also used the same white for the spots on his teeth. The paint is dry now. I'm going to leave it just for a couple of days so that the paint is completely cured, and then I'm going to give it a couple of coats of varnish. I'm going to use this satin varnish. I usually use matte varnish on all of my animals, but this guy's a fish, and so I think he needs just to have a little bit of sheen on him, so I'm going to use this satin varnish instead. I'll probably paint the base and the dowel maybe black. That would work. If you want to make yours out of wood, I think that would just look really, really nice. Now remember, if you make a pufferfish of your own, I really want to see it. I'm going to put a link down below where you can actually show it off on my website. It's at ultimatepapermache.com, and then there's a whole bunch of more stuff, so I'll put a link down to it below. You'll also want to look at all the other things that people have made on that page. It's just really amazing work that our fellow paper mache artists are making, so make sure that you go check those out, and in the meantime, go make something. Then come back in and visit me, ultimatepapermache.com. I'll see you there.